Chosen one, stop scrolling and listen closely, because what you are about to hear did not reach you by accident. This is not a story. This is not a metaphor. This is a spiritual account of something that happened only 3 hours ago, and heaven has interrupted your day to make sure you hear it before another hour passes. Somewhere, in a place you cannot see, a decision was made against you. A plan was built in whispers. A scheme was assembled in secret by people who smiled at you while planning behind your back. They believed they could take something from you without consequence. They believed the timing was perfect, the cover was tight, and no one would ever trace it back to them. They were wrong. 3 hours ago, justice moved. What they planned for you has already collapsed in on itself, and by the time this message reaches you, the reversal has already begun. You feel it, don't you? That strange tightness in your chest earlier today, that sudden wave of unease that came from nowhere, that moment when your spirit seemed to whisper that something was happening just outside your awareness, that was not anxiety. That was not your imagination. That was your spirit registering a shift in the atmosphere around you, a shift that occurred the instant heaven stepped between you and the plan formed against you. You did not see the danger. You did not need to. Protection does not require your permission to activate, and it does not wait for your understanding before it moves. It moved 3 hours ago, and it moved on your behalf. Think back over the last few days. Maybe you noticed a conversation that suddenly went quiet the moment you walked into the room. Maybe you felt an unexplainable heaviness settle over you at a time that made no logical sense. No bad news, no confrontation, just a weight that arrived and then lifted just as strangely as it came. Maybe a message you were expecting never showed up, or arrived changed, softer and more careful than it should have been. Maybe someone you trusted seemed slightly distant, slightly guarded, without ever explaining why. None of that was random. Each of those small moments was a ripple from the exact same event. The plan that was quietly building against you and the intervention that was quietly dismantling it before it ever had the chance to reach you. You do not need to go back and investigate every strange moment from the last few days. You simply need to understand that what felt unexplainable at the time finally makes sense now. Here is what you need to understand about yourself before we go any further. You carry something that unsettles the people around you who have not made peace with their own emptiness. You carry a light that exposes comparison the moment it walks into a room. You are not loud about it. You are not trying to outshine anyone. Your growth, your quiet confidence, it disturbs those who have not done the work on themselves. And when someone cannot compete with your light, they will often try to extinguish it instead. That is exactly what happened to you 3 hours ago. Someone chose extinguishing over growing. They chose sabotage over self-reflection. And in choosing that path, they triggered a spiritual law they did not understand and could not control. Before we go deeper into exactly what they planned and exactly how it turned back on them, I want you to do something small but important. If you feel in your spirit that this message is for you, type 777 in the comments right now as your declaration that you received this word. Like this video so the algorithm carries it to someone else who is walking through the exact same secret attack tonight without realizing it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their setbacks were never random. And subscribe, because what heaven is revealing to you does not stop here. It continues to unfold in the days ahead, and you will want to be here when the next layer is uncovered. Now, let's go back to where this really began, because darkness like this does not appear out of nowhere. It builds slowly, in silence, long before it ever tries to strike. To understand what happened 3 hours ago, we have to trace it back further than that, because the people who plotted against you did not wake up one morning and decide to become your enemy. Nobody starts there. It begins smaller than that, quieter than that, in places so subtle that even they did not notice it happening. It begins the first time they watched you succeed at something and felt a tightening in their chest instead of joy for you. It begins the first time your name was spoken with respect in a room they were standing in, and something inside them shrank instead of celebrated. It begins the first time you walked past them with peace on your face while they were carrying chaos in their own life. And instead of asking why your peace unsettled them, they simply decided that your peace was the problem. Every time you moved forward, something in them recoiled. Every time you were blessed, something in them kept score. Every time you stayed calm under pressure that would have broken someone else, something in them quietly resented the strength they could not access in themselves. This is how envy always begins. It never announces itself. It disguises itself as concern, as feedback, as jokes made just a little too pointed, as friendliness with an edge underneath it. It convinces a person that they are simply being honest when really they are being consumed. And the tragedy is that envy never stays where it starts. It grows. It demands to be fed. and the person carrying it either confronts it and lets it go, or they feed it until it becomes something they can no longer control. And they did not carry this alone. No one nurtures resentment in a vacuum for long before other voices find their way in and start reinforcing it. Someone listened to their complaints and agreed a little too quickly. Someone validated the comparison instead of gently challenging it. Someone who carried their own unresolved bitterness recognized a kindred feeling and fed it, because misery has always been good at finding company and calling it friendship. These voices did not force anything. They simply made the resentment feel reasonable. They turned a private insecurity into a shared narrative. And once a feeling becomes a shared narrative, it stops feeling like something a person needs to examine and starts feeling like something they are entitled to act on. That is how quiet envy becomes a group agreement, and how a group agreement eventually becomes a plan. C.S. Lewis understood this better than almost anyone who ever wrote about the human soul. In his reflections on temptation and the slow corruption of character, he warned that the danger was never the dramatic fall. The real danger was the gradual one. He described how a person can be led away from who they are meant to be, not through one violent moment of evil, but through 1,000 small permissions, 1,000 tiny compromises, each one so minor it barely seemed to matter at the time. A little resentment allowed to stay, a little comparison allowed to repeat, a little bitterness allowed to sit unspoken. None of it looks like much on its own, but add enough of those small permissions together, and eventually a person wakes up somewhere they never intended to go, having become someone they would not recognize from where they started. That is exactly the road the people who targeted you were walking. It did not begin with a plan to hurt you. It began with a feeling they refused to examine. A little envy here, a little comparison there, a little resentment they told themselves was justified. And instead of turning inward and asking why your life stirred something so uncomfortable in them, they turned outward and decided you were the problem that needed to be solved. Scripture puts it plainly in Galatians, where it says that whatever a person sows, that is exactly what they will reap. Not almost what they sow, not something close to it. Exactly what they sow. They were sowing resentment in secret and telling themselves it was strategy. What they did not realize is that the harvest for that kind of sowing always finds its way home. Comparison became resentment. Resentment became a private obsession they could not let go of no matter how much they tried to look unbothered on the surface. And that obsession eventually became something worse, a willingness to act on it, a decision to stop merely feeling threatened by you and start actively trying to undo you. That is the progression of every quiet betrayal. It never begins as betrayal. It begins as an unexamined feeling that was allowed to grow roots, and once those roots are deep enough, the person carrying them will eventually convince themselves that hurting you is not only acceptable, but necessary, even righteous in their own twisted framing of the situation. With that foundation now understood, we can move into the moment itself, because this is where the story turns, and this is where you finally see exactly what was set in motion against you 3 hours ago, and exactly how fast it came apart. 3 hours ago, they finally acted. Not impulsively, but with the kind of careful, deliberate calculation of someone who had been rehearsing this moment in their mind for weeks. They chose their timing precisely. They waited for a moment when you would be distracted, unaware, focused on something else entirely, because they knew that if you were paying attention, their plan would never survive contact with your awareness. They gathered what they needed. A conversation twisted just enough to sound believable. A half-truth positioned exactly where it would do the most damage. A quiet word dropped into the ear of someone whose opinion of you mattered, timed so precisely that it would look like concern rather than sabotage. They rehearsed how they would say it. They rehearsed the tone, the pauses, the practiced sincerity that would make the lie feel like truth. They believed they had built something airtight. In their mind, they had already won. They pictured your reputation cracking, your opportunity slipping away, your position weakening, and they pictured themselves finally feeling the relief of having pulled you down to where they believed you belonged. That feeling, that false sense of triumph before the plan had even fully played out, was not confidence. It was blindness. Darkness has a strange habit of making a person feel most powerful in the exact moment they are most exposed. And that is precisely where they stood 3 hours ago, convinced of a victory that had already begun crumbling beneath them. Because here is what they did not calculate. You do not walk through life unguarded. There is a covering over your life that does not depend on your awareness to function. A covering that has been quietly working behind the scenes long before you ever knew you needed it. The moment their plan was set into motion, that covering responded. Not loudly, not visibly, but completely. The conversation they engineered did not land the way they expected. The half-truth they had rehearsed came out clumsy and hollow the moment it left their mouth, and the person they were speaking to sensed something was off before the first sentence was even finished. What was designed to sound like concern sounded instead like exactly what it was: an attack dressed up as care. Instead of damaging your name, it damaged theirs. This is the part they never see coming. Spiritual law does not respond to intention the way manipulation does. It does not care how convincing the story sounds or how carefully the timing was planned. It responds to truth. And the moment a scheme built on falsehood is spoken into the light, even quietly, even privately, it begins to unravel from the inside out, because it was never strong to begin with. It only ever looked strong in the dark. The instant it met daylight, even the smallest sliver of daylight, the entire structure began to buckle. Within minutes, they started to feel it, though at first they could not name what was happening. A strange unease settled over them, the kind that comes when a plan you are certain about suddenly does not feel certain anymore. They replayed the conversation in their head, searching for what went wrong, and found nothing they could point to, no obvious mistake, because the mistake was never in the execution. It was in the very foundation of what they had built. You cannot construct something lasting on top of a lie, no matter how carefully you frame it. And the moment that truth surfaced in their own conscience, the ground beneath their scheme gave way. By the second hour, the unease had turned into something heavier. The person they had spoken to began asking questions, quiet questions, careful questions, the kind that come from someone who is starting to sense they were being used rather than confided in. Doubt crept in, not about you, but about them. Small inconsistencies in their story that had seemed invisible when they rehearsed it alone suddenly felt glaring under real scrutiny. Their voice had wavered in places they had not planned for it to waver. Their explanation had holes they had not noticed until someone else started poking at them. And with every question they could not smoothly answer, their carefully built plan lost another layer of credibility. This is the mirror of consequence, and it is one of the oldest and most consistent spiritual laws there is. Whatever you build in darkness against another person, you eventually have to stand in the light of yourself. Proverbs describes it with striking simplicity, warning that whoever digs a pit for someone else will fall into it themselves, and whoever tries to roll a stone toward another will find that stone rolling back over their own path. That is not poetic exaggeration. That is how spiritual consequence actually behaves. It is not random. It is not chance. It follows the one who set it in motion, because intention leaves a signature, and that signature always finds its way home to the person who wrote it. Somewhere in that second hour, they felt the panic set in, though they tried hard not to show it. They excused themselves to be alone for a moment, replaying every word they had said, searching for the exact sentence that had given them away, and finding instead that it was not one sentence. It was the whole foundation. A plan built on a lie does not fail because of one mistake in delivery. It fails because it was never load-bearing to begin with. It only ever looked solid because no one had leaned on it yet, and the moment real weight was placed on it, in the form of a simple, honest question, it gave way all at once rather than gradually. They reached for their phone to fix it, to smooth it over, to add one more detail that might rescue the story, and found that every new detail only tangled the original lie further. The way a person sinking in mud only sinks faster the harder they struggle against it. By the third hour, what they had built collapsed entirely. The story unraveled in front of the very people they had hoped would help destroy your credibility, and instead, it began destroying theirs. Where they had expected sympathy, they found suspicion. Where they had expected their version of events to be believed without question, they found themselves being questioned instead. The plan that was supposed to weaken your position had instead exposed the character of the person who built it, and no amount of backtracking, no amount of softening their story, could undo what had already been seen. In the days that follow, and you may already be noticing the early edges of this, the people closest to them will begin to see them differently, not because you said anything, but because truth has a way of continuing to surface long after the initial moment has passed. Trust, once cracked in someone's mind, rarely rebuilds itself back to where it was. They will find themselves working harder to be believed, explaining things that never used to require an explanation, and wondering why the room does not feel as warm toward them as it used to. That is not you punishing them. That is simply the natural cost of what they chose to build. Justice did not arrive with noise. It arrived with clarity. And clarity is often the most devastating form of justice there is, because it cannot be argued with once it has been seen. And you, meanwhile, remained untouched by the very thing designed to break you. You went about your 3 hours completely unaware that a battle had been fought and won on your behalf. unaware that a plan built specifically to unravel your peace had already unraveled itself instead. That is what protection looks like when it is real. It does not always announce itself with a dramatic rescue you can point to. Sometimes it looks exactly like an ordinary afternoon, while somewhere else, an entire scheme quietly falls apart before it ever reaches you. With the reversal now understood, we can move into what this actually means for you, because this was never only about them. Their collapse is simply the evidence. The real revelation is about the life you are being protected to walk into. What happened 3 hours ago was not an isolated event. It was a confirmation, one of many you will likely look back on someday and recognize as proof that your life has never actually been unguarded. Even in the seasons when it felt that way, you have been protected far more times than you have ever known, from plans you never even saw forming, from conversations that never happened the way someone hoped they would, from doors that quietly closed before you ever had to knock on them and be disappointed. This moment simply pulled back the curtain on a pattern that has always been true. You are not walking through life by chance. You are being watched over with an intention you are only now beginning to fully understand. But here is the responsibility that comes with that kind of covering. You cannot walk through the rest of your life unaware of the effect your presence has on people who have not yet done their own inner work. Some people will be inspired by your growth and use it as fuel for their own. Others will feel exposed by it and resent you for a stillness and clarity they have not built for themselves. That is not a flaw in you. That is simply the nature of light in a room that has grown used to shadow. You are not responsible for managing another person's insecurity, but you are responsible for staying aware, staying discerning, and refusing to shrink yourself just to make someone else more comfortable with their own stagnation. This is why the season ahead requires refinement from you, not because you did anything wrong, but because you are being prepared for a level of your life that will not tolerate the same carelessness you may have gotten away with before. Refinement here does not mean becoming someone else. It means becoming more fully who you already are, with less hesitation and less apology. It means choosing discipline in the moments when comfort would be easier. It means guarding your peace instead of explaining it to people who are never going to understand it anyway. It means speaking with intention instead of reacting out of old wounds. Every one of those choices strengthens the very covering that just protected you 3 hours ago, because alignment is not a one-time event, it is a daily practice. There are 3 things being asked of you in this season, and they are not complicated, but they are not easy either. The first is awareness. You can no longer afford to be naive about who is genuinely for you and who is quietly keeping score. The second is discipline. Your habits, your words, your posture, all of it needs to reflect the level you are being elevated to, not the level you are leaving behind. The third is grace without weakness. You are being asked to forgive without becoming careless, to stay compassionate without becoming a target, to release bitterness toward the people who tried to harm you without ever handing them access to your life again. Awareness, discipline, and grace without weakness. Hold on to those 3, and you will walk through whatever comes next with a steadiness that nothing built in secret will ever be able to shake. This does not require you to become harder or more guarded than you already are. It simply requires you to stop apologizing for the standard you hold yourself to. Keep speaking with kindness, but stop over-explaining your decisions to people who were never going to be satisfied, no matter what you said. Keep showing up with warmth, but stop mistaking access to your time and your trust for something that everyone automatically deserves. Keep growing loudly through your actions, quietly through your character, and let the people who cannot handle either sort themselves out of your life on their own timeline without you having to push them. There is something else you should know before we close, because protection like this rarely arrives as a single isolated event. Pay attention to the next 7 days. You may notice a sudden clarity about a relationship you have been unsure about, a decision that finally feels obvious after weeks of confusion, or an opportunity resurfacing that you thought had already closed. You may also notice 1 or 2 people quietly stepping back from your life without a dramatic goodbye, without conflict, simply fading. And that is not a loss. That is a filtering. Not everyone who has been close to you was meant to walk into the next season with you. And heaven has a way of making that separation gentle when it is necessary, rather than forcing you to discover someone's true character the hard way a second time. Stay watchful during this window. Not anxious, not suspicious of everyone around you, simply watchful. The way someone walks when they know they are being looked after and no longer need to control every outcome to feel safe. You may be tempted, now that you know what was attempted against you, to confront them, to expose them publicly, to make sure everyone knows exactly what they tried to do. I understand that impulse completely. But hear this clearly. You do not need to defend what heaven has already defended. You do not need to fight a battle that has already been won on your behalf. Chasing after vindication in front of other people often costs more peace than it returns, and the people who need to see the truth already saw it in real time 3 hours ago, when the story fell apart in front of them without you ever having to say a single word. Let the silence be your strength here. Let your peace be the proof. Nothing convinces a room faster than watching someone stay calm while everything meant to shake them simply fails to land. With the call to alignment now given, we move into the final part of this message, the part that is less about understanding and more about receiving, because knowledge without a response changes very little. This next portion is a moment to anchor what you have heard into your spirit so it becomes something you carry, not just something you listen to. Let this be a moment of quiet declaration over your life. Heavenly Father, thank you for the covering that moved on my behalf 3 hours ago before I ever knew there was a battle happening at all. Thank you for intercepting a plan I could not see and did not need to see in order to be protected from it. I release any bitterness toward the people who tried to harm me, not because what they did was acceptable, but because carrying resentment gives them a place in my life they no longer deserve. I ask that you continue to guard my peace, sharpen my discernment, and steady my spirit in every season where opposition rises simply because I chose to grow instead of stay small. Let me walk in wisdom, not paranoia. Let me walk in confidence, not arrogance. Let me walk in grace without ever mistaking grace for weakness. Strengthen what needs strengthening in me and remove what no longer belongs in my life, including any fear that this could happen again and next time go differently. It will not, because the same covering that moved 3 hours ago has not gone anywhere. It is still here, still active, still watching over the path ahead of me. Close every door that was only ever going to lead me back into old cycles of comparison and self-doubt. Open every door that leads toward the version of me that is still being formed. And in the moments when I forget all of this, when fear creeps back in and makes me question whether I am really covered, remind me gently of these 3 hours, and let that memory be enough to steady me again. I declare that what was planned against me in secret has already failed. I declare that I am not moved by what people whisper when they think I cannot hear them. I declare that my peace is not up for negotiation, and my growth is not up for debate. I declare that every attempt to diminish me will continue to reveal more about the person attempting it than it ever will about me. I declare that I am covered, I am aware, and I am walking forward exactly as I was always meant to, undistracted by shadows that were never strong enough to reach me in the first place. If these words landed somewhere true in you, type 777 in the comments as your declaration that you receive this. Like this video so it reaches someone else who needs to hear tonight that their setbacks were never random and their protection was never accidental. Share it with someone walking through a quiet betrayal right now who does not yet know that the reversal has already started. And subscribe, because this is not the last message meant for you. There is more being uncovered, and you will want to be here for what comes next. Stay awake. Stay aligned, stay covered. What they planned for you has already backfired, and what heaven has planned for you is only just beginning.